Today on Locked On Red Wings, Matt Roy is a perfect fit for the Detroit Red Wings defense.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I swear to God I hit the button. I swear I pressed it.
Yeah, okay. For sure did.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a former broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty is the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And on today's episode, guys, we're going to do a pending free agent profile on right-handed defenseman Matt Roy, who is currently with the LA Kings, but that could change coming July 1st. And there's a lot to like about this profile, and we'll obviously get to all of that. But first, I got to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Also want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, first of all, happy Thursday. How you doing, buddy? Your Tigers, they won another series.
I know. We got to. We're back over 500, which is quite the accomplishment given where they were at a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah, well, we will take that. I'm a big Tigers fan too. Obviously, not to the degree you are, but I've been watching them every single day, right there with you. So it's been
fun
the highs
lately.
and the lows. Yeah, but now that they're winning,
this season, but
it's so funny. Allison's she's, for whatever reason, not a big reason of Zach McKinstry. And so when he hit that solo shot to start the game, I'm like, you gotta be hurting on the inside. The hater. He comes and silences the hater. Oh, that was fun for me. But on today's episode, we'll be talking hockey, as we always do, and not baseball. Matt Roy of the LA Kings is set to be a UFA. He's a pending UFA right now. He's 29 years old. He had a point total of 29 this season, something not too high, 25, 5 goals, 20 assists in 81 games. But Matt Roy, if you're signing him, you don't care about point totals. That's not what you're getting out of him. And when I was doing research to talk about him, the more and more I looked up, the more and more I realized, Scotty, that he honestly might be the most perfect fit the Detroit Red Wings could possibly go after in free agency this offseason for any of the positions that they're looking at.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about a lot of the reasons why, but I think it's really a laundry list. There really is a lot of reasons as to why he is such a good fit. I mean, we can start with just his fit on the blue line, and I'm sure we'll break down kind of where he slides into that as the show goes on. But when you look at the current roster construction of the Detroit Red Wings blue line, something we've talked about a lot, obviously, I mean, all season this year, and especially now in the offseason when we're kind of game planning what we want to see the team do this summer, is to kind of bolster and raise the ceiling of this defense. They have a lot of bodies, but there's a difference between having a lot of bodies and having a lot of, higher end talent. And I think that this is a move that accomplishes both of those things, right? It improves your blue line depth while also raising the ceiling of how good this blue line can be. He's young. You're going to go and sign him to presumably a decently long contract. So he would solidify that for a long time. And yeah, he's in his, 20, he's 28, 29. You can have him for I don't know, 4 to 6 years and not really feel too bad about it if that's the kind of length that he's looking for. So, yeah, man, I really can't say enough good things about this fit either.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too, because going into the offseason, this was not a name I knew much about, because he plays in LA, which is West Coast. So there's West Coast people, the viewership on the West Coast in general is usually, unless you're Edmonton Oilers media market, right, tends to be a little bit lower just because of the later start times for us on the East Coast. So I had less opportunities to watch him. Plus, he was overshadowed by guys like Drew Doughty, right? So this was a name I was like, I don't know much about. And then we had that mailbag a couple weeks ago and somebody asked about Matt Roy. And that was the first time I looked into him and I was like, this, like, put him on my radar. And then as recently as yesterday, I remember we were on the podcast, or it was right after we had finished recording the podcast, rather. And we were talking about, hey, what should we do for tomorrow? And we were like, well, let's do a free agent profile. And we talked about a defenseman. And I was like, well, let's talk about Matt Roy. And so I'm doing some research, and then pops up Shayna Goldman and Eric Stevens of The Athletic come out with an article about Matt Roy. Like, I see it on Twitter right after we get off talking about it, and I read the article, and like, it just, everything I've read about him, because that was a fantastic article, and I recommend anyone check that out. Yeah. And the more data I look up about Matt Roy, I'm just like, this guy is such a perfect fit. And the obvious things are right. Like, he's a right side D, and right now, the right side of the blue line is the biggest question mark the Detroit Red Wings have. Like, you have Moritz Seider. And after that, it's like, okay, I'm not really sure anyone is a top 4 right side D-man right now. Like, Jeff Petrie is, I think, is a fine defenseman in a bottom pair role. We've been over that. Justin Holl, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about roster construction as a potential con, but you know, Justin Holl played like 30-something games last year. He's likely I would assume is likely going to be gone. I would assume both parties want to part ways. Then you have who? Like, Albert Johansson can play the right side. Shane Gostisbehere's probably gone. Based on our speculation, we would assume he's probably gone this offseason. So you're looking to upgrade that right side of the defense in particular, and he averaged the second most amount of minutes per game with the LA Kings as a skater. Obviously, all the goaltenders at the top, but it was Drew Doughty, and then it was Matt Roy. Matt Roy played the second most amount of game time on the ice per game for the LA Kings, and he had the most time on the ice amongst all players on the penalty kill. So he's a top 4 defenseman who can eat big-time minutes on the right side, is defensive-minded, and is a huge penalty killer. And like, what was the biggest thing that Steve Yzerman continually says is the biggest need for this franchise? It's to get better defensively. And he checks literally all those boxes. You could look at his evolving hockey player card, and he's listed as an 86 overall with a 71st percentile rank in offense and a 92 percentile rank at defense. His even strength numbers look fantastic. His shorthanded, his penalty kill numbers look fantastic. You go to the Dauber Hockey Prospect Frozen Tools, right? One of my favorite graphs to show how their usage is. He gets harder matchups by the end of the season, he had harder usage than a guy like Jeff Petrie. But granted, he played still mostly defensive zone deployments, but just barely. It was pretty close to a 50-50 split. But again, that has a big impact on the team that he plays on, has a big impact on that. Like, the LA Kings were the 4th best possession team in the NHL when you look at Corsi, Fenwick, expected goals. So everyone on that team is probably going to have more offensive zone deployments than anyone on the Red Wings would, right? So he's getting tougher matchups. He still has a bulk majority, just by a little bit, defensive zone deployments. Like, he just checks all the boxes for what I'm looking for out of a player. And on top of that, the little cherries on top, Scotty, he's a right shot defenseman. He's from Canton, Michigan, which could be a huge, that doesn't matter for playing on the Red Wings, but it does matter for potentially luring a guy back to his hometown. And he's 29 years old. So, like, he's still in the prime of his career. You're not signing a 33-year-old, or you're not getting Jeff Petrie, who's 35. You know, you're getting a guy who could potentially be here and in his prime while the Red Wings are trying to compete for playoffs and a Stanley Cup. So there's just so much to love about a potential reunion between Matt Roy and Michigan.
For sure. And again, like, one of the things that gets both of us very excited about it is the fit. And we talked about, as you mentioned, there being a right shot. I think that really, like, you can play a lot of really fun games mixing and matching that top 4. And we can do that after the break if you want, but there's just a lot of really fun kind of pairs and possibilities on this blue line if you add him to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? With that, we'll use that as our tease going into segment 2 of Lockdown Red Wings. So stay tuned. Going to talk to you guys today about Game Time. They are making getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. With last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying tickets for those last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And also, they got flash deals that allow you to save even more with exclusive in-app deals and select seats ahead of the game or the event. And of course, one thing I love the most about Game Time, Scotty, and I know that you do too, being a Tigers fan and living relatively close, is that ability to see all-in prices. They don't mess with you with all the fees. There's no surprise fees at checkouts, and the toggling the feature shows the total up front. The lowest price guarantee also means you'll get 110% of the difference on Game Time as well. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. So, right, you mentioned there, we mentioned in segment 1, obviously, how he fits so well with the Red Wings. They need to get better defensively. He's a top 4 defensive defenseman who eats big minutes on the penalty kill. Another one of the reasons why that's so important is because it makes your top 4 just overall better, and you can play with matchups a little bit more, and he could potentially even take and make guys like Moritz Seider's life a little bit easier as proxy because he's capable of taking those big minutes. But that would lead you to, ask the next question is, what would potential pairings look like if you do manage to acquire Matt Roy? So, and here's where one of the cons is, right, Scotty, is the current roster construction as is. To make a move of this nature, they would have to do some roster juggling. You can't bring Matt Roy in and expect Simon Edvinsson and Albert Johansson to come up while still retaining guys like Justin Holl and Olli Maatta. Something's got to give, because at a certain point, you're going to have like 9 defensemen, and you just can't do that.
Yeah, I think, we've talked ad nauseum about the Justin Holl situation. At this point, I would be pretty surprised if he was on this roster by the end of the summer when, training camp and the preseason starts up. So that's one that everyone kind of looks at and understands is somebody who probably isn't going to make it through the summer on this roster. But yeah, like you said, Olli Maatta, but you're also losing Gostisbehere, presumably, right? I guess that's not a guarantee, but you're also losing Gostisbehere. Like there are going to be, assuming the Justin Holl thing happens, a couple of openings there. And I think that at the end of the day, like if you can bring in talent that is going to be one of your better players, the second that he puts on the wing wheel sweater, you do it and you'll figure it out. There's no way they're going to look at this roster. And if they have an opportunity and have a contract in place, a number in place that they feel comfortable with, and Roy feels comfortable with, they're not going to be like, oh, well, we have Olli Maatta, so like we're not going to bring in Matt Roy. Like, you know what I mean? And like, that's not disrespect to Olli Maatta. We were, advocates for extending him at the time. It's just like that's just something that I can't imagine would actually be like a huge hindrance to bringing a guy like this in. And I think when you then look at that top 4, wouldn't a pair of Roy and Edvinsson just make you kind of tingle?
That's exactly where my mind was going to, because he's such a responsible defenseman and he can play such big minutes that he would be the perfect partner to help mentor and develop Simon Edvinsson at the NHL level. Like, we think that Simon Edvinsson has top pair caliber potential, but I don't think that they're going to put him and thrust him into that role given what Seider's doing right off the bat, right? And as that season goes on, they can continue to give that second pair more and more responsibility, thereby freeing up Seider and whoever his partner is to be more of a weapon in the offensive zone. Like, it makes too much sense. He's perfect for mentoring a guy like Simon Edvinsson, but he's also perfect for opening up and freeing Moritz Seider to have more offensive zone deployments and maybe play some more shifts against weaker competition to take advantage of that offensive skill set that we know he has. We know he can score 50 plus points in the NHL. We have seen it. So like this again, it just makes too much sense. And like you slot him in on that second pair with Edvinsson, your top pair, I think you're sticking with, assuming that, again, we're basing this on the speculation that right now Matt Roy's like the one acquisition they make. And so now your pairs are Sherratt and Seider. Again, I think Sherratt and Sider had a really good chemistry down the stretch. Sherratt had a much better bounce back second season. I liked that pairing down the stretch for the Detroit Red Wings. I thought it was better than the Sider-Woolman pairing we saw this season. So then you have Petrie and Woolman on the third pair with Albert Johansson as your 7th D or Petrie as your 7th D, those two rotating, because Albert Johansson, while being a left side or a left shot D, did play time this season on the right side with Simon Edvinsson in Grand Rapids, so he can play that way. Like, I think that, and we talked about it, Petrie, actually, I think he was like 2nd or 3rd on the team and even strength assists. Like, we both believe, despite the fact that we were very frustrated with him throughout the season, believe that Petrie was just over-deployed with where he's at his career, right? He's on the downside of his career, but we still think he can be an effective right-side D-man. So, like, if that bumps him down to the third pair, I think that's where he belongs. And Jake Woolman is a more offensive-oriented defenseman as well, but he clearly proved that he wasn't necessarily up to snuff for the first pair of minutes that Sider was getting. He looked oftentimes overwhelmed. So what this allows you to do is have 3 pairs of defense that can all play like reasonable minutes, and none of them have to be incredibly sheltered like we saw with the Mata-Gossis pairing this last year. Like, it just eases the job of everyone on defense by just inserting Matt Roy into the lineup. But then the issue is what do you do with Olli Mata? What do you do with Justin Holl, which, again, we've talked about ad nauseum. Those are something that Steve Yzerman's going to have to figure out, and we talked about it early in the offseason when we talked about who stays, who goes, and we mentioned that the easiest 2 defensemen to move, and this is nothing against Olli Mata. I am fine with the way Olli Mata plays his game. It's the fact that he has 1 year left on a $3 million deal with no protection for trade or, movement clauses or whatever. He just becomes a very easy player to move, and I think he fits in. He's a plug and play for a lot of different teams, but I think you can easily upgrade over him with who your options are on the left side currently in the organization. And then Justin Holl, again, we know, like, you either got to trade him or buy him out. And I think it's in the best interest of both parties. And then, boom, you have your 7 defensemen for next year. Like we said, we don't think there's going to be a lot of movement this offseason in acquisitions, but in terms of free agents you bring in, there's going to be just a couple. But I just think of everyone we have talked about so far, and I know I'm saying it over and over again, but I want to really emphasize this, of everyone we've talked about this offseason via trade, via free agency, this is the one guy I look at and I'm like, holy cow, you plug and play. He might be one of the best fits. He and Brett Pesce, one of those 2 guys. Like, those are the 2 guys that I'm looking at and go, this guy is going to make the defensive core better just because of that ripple effect.
Yeah, I mean, that's circling back to the conversation at the beginning too, right? Like, this is a guy that improves your depth and also improves your top end ability. And I think that really just leaves what type of term you're comfortable giving him, because that's obviously the million or potentially $5 or $6 million question is going to be what kind of contract does he get? Because at the end of the day, if there's a bidding war for him, that's probably the reason why LA doesn't bring him back, is a price gets too steep. Like, you're not going to be able to just like swing in and get this dude for 3.5, right? Like, this is something he's where
gonna be paid like a true top 4 defenseman.
Correct. Yeah, this is something that if especially if in the open market the Kings don't bring him back, it will be because his price tag is too rich for them, and that would probably be pretty rich considering how good of a defenseman he is.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in segment 3, as well as the overall likelihood that LA even lets him go. So the second time we've talked about the Kings and their contract cap situation in like this week. So stay tuned for that in segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We're talking about Matt Roy, the right shot defenseman out of LA, 29 years old, from Canton, Michigan. Top 4 defensive defenseman who plays a lot of penalty kill. Just seems to be a perfect fit. But when you're going on the free agent market, again, for a top 4 defenseman, yet again, you're going to have to pay top 4 defenseman money. And one of the players who frequently, again, I steer you guys back to the Shayna Goldman and Eric Stevens article by The Athletic, where they have some contract projections for Matt Roy. And One of those was on the free agent market. He's probably going to command a 6x6 deal, which is comparable to Ben Sherratt's contract when that was signed. That was a 4x4.75. Yeah. So you're basically going to be signing contract-wise, not in terms of play style or anything, but another player to a Sherratt-esque deal. And that is an issue for the Detroit Red Wings, is can they afford that?
Yeah, and right. This is the biggest question of this whole thing. And I think, again, not to reiterate, but like the Kings are definitely not just going to be like, oh, like we're not even going to try, right? Like this is a talented defenseman that played a very, very large role on this young up and coming team last year or this season. And in the same article, they had cited that the Kings range, according to their approximation, which you take that with what you will, is somewhere in the upper five, maybe even $1 million range. And then, like you said, they have his value at around 6 to 6.2 mil. So if it does get a little bit too rich, you're talking about bringing in a guy for 6+ mil, assuming that's what it's going to take for LA to kind of back off and say no, no, thank you. So considering all of the other financial obligations the Wings not necessarily have currently, because that's just how much cap space you have, but the future moves, right? We're presuming that there's an extension for Seider at some point. We're presuming that at some point in the future that Raymond is going to get similar treatment. Those are going to obviously be heavily determining factors for how much money is available. Pretty Captain Obvious statement, but in a vacuum, I have no issue giving him 6x6. That doesn't bother me really whatsoever.
For the quality of player you're getting,
that the cap is going to continue to go up throughout the course of his contract. I think that's something that, assuming he doesn't fall off a cliff, even if it's just like a gradual decline as he gets older, by the end of it, he's going to be a middle of the road, obviously still top 4 paid defenseman in terms of comparing it to the rest of the league. Like that really doesn't deter me or scare me away at all. It's just simply a matter of, if you are budgeting and considering the price tag on those two guys that we know we're going to have to pay soon, are you comfortable then filling in the rest of that void with Matt Roy?
Right, and we've talked about it, again, ad nauseum. It's one of our favorite phrases, because in this time of the offseason, you tend to retread a lot of things, but with the assumption that Seider and Raymond will combine cost you about $16 million. That's like our conservative number, assuming they both get like max length deals. And we're using that as a worst case scenario of what the cap might look like post contract. We're sitting here at what, $12 million is the thing we keep saying. So you're committing $6 million to now a free agent. Be honest with you, in a vacuum, I'm still fine with that. Like this team, and we can talk. I feel like a good conversation later in the offseason is Steve Yzerman's biggest wins and misses as general manager in terms of free agency and trade, because some of these contracts, obviously a couple of years down the line now, haven't looked great. But like Matt Roy's one that I have confidence will look really good for the Detroit Red Wings based on the player that they're getting. And then when you add in, right, like we're talking in a vacuum, if they don't make any moves and they just sign him to a $6 million deal, I'm already on board. But if you add in the fact that then they'll have to move to defenders, in my world, if I was general manager, which thank God I'm not, because I'd be a horrible general manager, but if I were, I'd be moving Justin Holl and Olli Maatta. Well, Justin Holl makes $3.4 million. Olli Maatta makes $3 million. Right there, for at least the first year, is the $6 million you need to sign Matt Roy if you move those two guys. If you were to buy out Justin Holl, okay, well then you have 4.5 of the $6 million you need. So you're kind of replacing that cap with another cap. Now, granted, I understand that Matt Roy would then go on past when those contracts would expire, but so would other contracts. Jeff Petry's only on the books for one more season at a 2.34 cap hit. You have Ben Sherratt for just 2 more seasons. So if you get Matt Roy for a 6x6, your defensive, besides Moritz Seider, your defensive core could look completely different just a few years down the line. Like, it just, you add in those circumstances, and for me, it just honestly sweetens the pot for me. Like, because of that rolling cap structure that we keep saying Steve Yzerman has implemented, where every year he's staggering contracts and no one outside of your Dylan Larkins is signed to like a max length deal. You get a lot of 4s and 5s. Every offseason, you have the ability to then sign another guy to a 4 or 5 year deal or 6-year deal on Matt Roy, and then you keep that ball rolling. Next year, more cap. It's just been such a good cap management by Steve Yzerman up to this point. And yeah, it's starting to get tighter because the team's getting better, and that's just how it works. But the only real issues I see with signing Matt Roy is, one, you have to then figure out what you're doing with the players on your own roster. And then 2, again, would LA even give him up? Because you mentioned that, and we mentioned it on the episode the other day talking about Cam Talbot. They have $20 million in cap space projected, and they do have players they have to re-sign. Like half of their offensive core is RFAs needing new contracts. But like they could commit to re-signing him because he's a huge part of their D-core. He doesn't make he's not going to make $11 million like Drew Doughty, but they could decide he's a priority over signing Cam Talbot or another goaltender that they think is going to make a big difference, right? So it depends on what LA is going to do, and it depends on what Steve Yzerman can do with this roster. But all of the cons we have mentioned, Scotty, like none of them are about how he plays. The only potential downside to his play style would be his lack of offensive output, but that's not even, in my book, it's not even a con. I don't care about that. Like, the Florida Panthers just made the Stanley Cup final with no defender over 40 points this season because they are a deep, complete team. Everyone on that team contributes. And yes, they have high-level talent, right? Like Matthew Tkachuk, Sasha Barkov, guys like that. But everyone on that team contributes. You don't need a Shane Gostisbehere to get 57 points to make it. And so just being a possession team, a responsibly defensive team is going to get you over the hump. And Matt Roy helps you there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too. Like this is, you're obviously losing points just on paper in Gostisbehere, but we talked about the negatives with him at length during the season and obviously in the offseason to follow. I think that, again, I guess I'm just a broken record. I don't want to just keep repeating myself over and over, but like this raises and improves your depth while also improving your top end talent. And the situation of, again, like penalty kill, huge addition there, and getting guys who are defensive minded and defensively sound not only fits just because we've been talking about a lot this season, how you just need to improve your defense, but also it's an exact fit of what this front office is trying to bring in as well.
So let us know in the comments. Have we convinced you that Matt Roy should be a Detroit Red Wing if they can sign him? And by far, like obviously, the Red Wings are not the only team that's going to be gunning for him. There's every team in the NHL would love to have a Matt Roy if possible, just given what he brings to the table. But, I do think that of the teams in the NHL that he would be a really good fit on, it would be, I think the Detroit Red Wings are like a top 5 team. And again, that article by Shayna Goldman and Eric Stevens, they agree. They have the Red Wings listed as one of the top potential landing spots for Matt Roy should he hit free agency. So let us know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, if you think there's somebody else out there that's a better fit, or if you're just not comfortable giving him $6 million on the contract. So, Scotty, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow. Probably going to do a little bit of a playoff. What did you call it? We're going to do a finals preview, but there's also another thing you were calling it, like a up to this point.
Yeah, maybe just recap. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit of a recap.
I don't know if I had a special word for it, but yeah, we just haven't talked too much about
the story so far. That's what you were saying.
Yeah, that is, yeah. So yeah, we just haven't talked about the postseason really too terribly much, and I think this has been a really, really, really awesome Stanley Cup playoff, and then we'll preview the finals a little bit.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.